thank you for choosing this session. As you know, the afternoons are all breakout sessions. Next one after this as well, and it'll be the same format for tomorrow afternoon. So as the program subcommittee put topics together, we want to pick topics that are novel, cutting edge, relevant to all of you. And I think we can't think of too many topics that don't equal this one in terms of relevancy, and that is the whole complexity and difficulty of maintaining weight once one has achieved their goal or a healthy body weight. And losing weight is not necessarily the same strategies or tactics as taking weight off. So as Scott and I put this together, we thought we would divide the two elements or topics regarding how do I keep my weight up into two different categories. I'm going to speak first for hopefully about 20 minutes or 25 minutes and talk about the psychological, behavioral, cognitive, or thinking things that we think we know that are important in taking weight off and keeping weight off. And then Scott's going to talk about other options, particularly pharmacologic or drug-related options, which both of us have found to be particularly helpful in providing an added benefit or edge for someone who's struggling to keep their weight off. So that's how we're going to do it, and then we'll come together for some Q&A right after that. So I'm going to go ahead and get that started. So if you have questions, keep them in your mind or write them down, and we'll do the same thing with the microphones when we're done. So mine is weight maintenance and weight regain, what the research shows. Is the outline of what I'm going to cover. The difficulty of maintaining weight loss, the importance of individuality, and Dr. Gardner and Dr. Church this morning really emphasized the whole idea of individuality, and I'm going to come back to that in my presentation. Some of the cardinal behaviors that are consistent with success, and then the last two bullet points are areas that I'm particularly interested in, a lot of my direction and that motivates me and have done some research and publication in. This whole idea of a life events weight journey, kind of a narrative approach, hearing from patients what is difficult and what gets in the way. And then lastly, what I call psychosocial behavioral segmentation, which is some of the work that I've done on a six-factor questionnaire and give you a little input on that. So let me start with this slide. This slide is to demonstrate how difficult it is to keep weight off. It comes from NHANES, which is this national survey that is done every 2 years or so, in which measurements are done and individuals cross-sectionally across the United States are asked questions. In this particular one, individuals are asked, what percent of your weight have you been able to keep off for a year? And really disheartening, what it shows, the x-axis, the one that goes up and down, is the percent of individuals who endorsed it. And that is that only 35%, or 1 in 3 individuals, were able to keep off 5% of their weight out to a year, which is really disappointing and disheartening, but that's how difficult it is. And you can see that about 15% of people were able to keep off 10% of their weight, and it really drops thereafter. So if you are if you are someone who has really took weight off and struggling to keep that weight off, this really reflects what you're going through. It's very, very difficult. And those of us who are healthcare providers are aware of this, and many have done research to try to find out how can we help individuals keep their weight off that they have already done. And this is just some data I want to show you from the weight loss maintenance randomized trial. And they're trying to ask the question, if we gave individuals either internet-type approaches like chat rooms and internet support or face-to-face help, can we help them keep their weight off? So in this trial, which is called, in phase 1, everyone lost weight. And if you're able to lose weight, then you got into the trial and you were then randomized to either self-care, internet tracking, or internet type of support, or self-care. And what you see, again, disheartening, is that all groups gained weight, and these are people who were in a trial, and they knew they were in a trial regarding weight management. And they all ended up gaining weight, although what the investigators found is that monthly brief personal contact did provide modest benefit. And you can see that bottom line here. The very bottom curve is the one that is this personal contact, and they tend to keep more weight off after the end of the trial, but all of them tended to gain weight, unfortunately. And I want to show you some data from the look-ahead trial that is not a weight regain study, but it's a weight loss study, but some very, very interesting information came out of this that I'm going to show you in a slide or two. The look-ahead trial was taking over 5,000 individuals who had diabetes and also were overweight or had obesity, and who were randomized to two different arms, a kind of an education arm and then an intervention arm, and then they studied them out to over 11 years. And what they found is the same kind of change in that those in the education arm didn't lose that much weight, but those in the intervention arm, called the ILI, lost a great deal of weight at 1 year. And although they were meant to keep the weight off, they ended up regaining weight even under supervision of the individuals who were managing the trial. But here's the next slide is the most important one I want to show you. And it has to do with individuality, which really sets the stage for the rest of my talk. That I've just been showing you averages, like Christopher Gardner this morning talked about the problems with averages. Thank you very much. What this shows is that if you take everyone in this trial that lost 10% of their body weight, which is really a good outcome, over the next 4 years, people end up gaining weight. But what I want to demonstrate is the very bottom there is that nearly 50% of the individuals in this trial were able to keep off that 10%, where other ones started to regain that weight. And that's a very, very important observation that, again, I'm going to carry forward, and that is, what is it that those individuals who are successful, because everyone enters a program, right, and says, I'm going to be the one who's successful. So what is it that successful people do to keep their weight off? And what we learned from the look-ahead trial, and I'm going to give you many other data points to think about, and some of them are reproducing, is that they, number one, attended more treatment sessions. The take-home message for me as a clinician is when I see a patient in my practice, I talk about frequency of visits is so important. To say, I got it, I'm on my own, is not likely to be as successful. So you want to come in as frequently as possible and work with someone. They also found increased physical activity. Those that were more active tended to be more successful. Again, this isn't a big surprise, but they demonstrated this. Those that reduced their calories were successful. And lastly, interestingly, they found those that used meal replacements were more successful. So what's meal replacements? Bars, shakes, and frozen entrees. Individuals who incorporated those types of products tended to be more successful. The other database I want to bring to your attention, some of you actually may belong to this, which is the National Weight Control Registry, which are to get into this registry, which anyone who meets this criteria can enroll, and then you're monitored and you're studied and you're providing information to others. And if you've lost 30 pounds or more and maintained it for a year, you can get into the registry. And if you look at all these individuals who were successful and you ask them, what are you doing to keep your weight off? This is what the registry individuals tell us. They say they're maintaining calorie balance, so that's a goal. They're increasing their physical activity, and Tim Church talked about that, 225, 300 minutes of physical activity or so. Reducing sedentary activity, that's the opposite, right? One is getting more activity, the other is reducing sedentary activity, which means get up, walk around, and so forth. Maintaining dietary vigilance, meaning when they're eating, they're mindful they're eating. When they go to a restaurant, they're aware of what they're doing. They're vigilant of their diet. They're on top of it. And they also are monitoring daily. They're weighing themselves and they're monitoring their activity. That's what individuals do in the weight control registry. They then took these individuals, or a group of them, and followed them out for 10 more years. And similar to the information I was showing you before, once you've lost your weight, that doesn't mean your story is over. In fact, when you look at these individuals, they tended to gain weight over the subsequent 10 years. But the investigators in this registry asked these individuals, what are you doing? And then they made some conclusions. And what they found is that the individuals who maintained their weight the best had a fewer number of what they call adverse behavioral problems. Those that gained more weight had more of what they call adverse behavioral changes. And I put on the left here what those adverse behavioral changes were. What is it that caused them to regain the weight that they desperately did not want to regain? And what they did is they reduced their physical activity, they increased the percent of fat in their diet, they decreased their dietary restraint, which is very similar to this disinhibition. Disinhibition is a loss of restraint. In other words, they just lost their mojo. When food was around them, they felt compulsive. They were impulsive to eat the food. They didn't have the restraint to say no or to eat in moderation. They lost that ability. And they also reduced their self-weighing. So that's what they found. So the inverse is, of course, the more you maintain these behaviors, the more successful you're likely to be. So these are all observational studies. And if you go see a healthcare provider, this is the kind of guidance that we are given when we counsel patients. And what we are doing is, we tell our patients, is for weight loss maintenance, prescribe a face-to-face or telephone-delivered weight loss maintenance program that provides regular contact, high levels of physical activity, monitor your body weight regularly, and consume a calorie-reduced diet. Now that may sound like, duh, I know that, but this comes from the evidence, and this is hard to do. But the more you do this and the more consistently you follow these guidelines based on data, the more successful you're likely to be. You saw this type of a graphic this morning from both Christopher Gardner and Tim Church, called a waterfall plot. So you can see why it's called waterfall. It kind of looks like a waterfall. And both of them showed you that even if someone is in the exact same program, some individuals do incredibly well, some don't do so well in the same program. And it's this kind of information that really intrigues me in a lot of my professional career, is to understand what is it that these individuals who are really successful doing. In other words, I want to go with the winners. I want to go and try to mimic those that are doing well. And there's been a fair amount of literature about that, and I'm going to, from here on out, review some of that, and then after that, turn to some of my own interests that I've been doing. So this is a review article that came out several years ago, and the title of the review article is Who Succeeds in Maintaining Weight Loss? And it's a summary of the literature at that time, and not that much has changed since then, although I'll highlight it a little bit more. And some of it I've already told you. Physically active. Regular meal rhythm basically means like a conductor in an orchestra. It's breakfast and lunch and dinner, and it may have some meals in between. That's what a regular meal rhythm is. Versus, I have breakfast, I don't have breakfast, I don't know, maybe have lunch if there's time, then eat a heavy dinner. Right? That's more chaotic. So you want something that's a regular meal rhythm. Flexibility in eating, self-monitoring. I've talked a lot about that. I'm putting a box around the ones that are really intriguing to me because, number one, they're very hard to measure. Number two, we rarely ask these questions when we see patients in our programs, but they're really provocative to me. Things like coping capacity. That makes sense, right? If I cope by eating or an emotional eater, I need new coping strategies. That kind of makes sense to me. Self-efficacy means I have the belief that I can do it because I've done it before. I mean, how many, not by show of hands, but how many of you have been in programs and been successful more times than you'd even like to admit to? But that should give you not so much the weight regain, but the fact that you've lost weight give you that self-efficacy, that belief that I really can do this, and I need to think more clearly, what was I doing when I lost the weight? Autonomy, meaning I don't need someone to tell me what to do all the time. I have a sense of self-control and autonomy to do it. Healthy narcissism, right? Healthy narcissism. I do like myself. I do believe in myself. I am an important person. I can do this. That would be like a healthy narcissism. Stability in life, right? The hard time to take on weight control when you've lost your job, the commute has increased, bought a new house, someone died in the family. right? That's not stability in life. That's a tough time to take on weight control. And lastly, capacity for close relating. I can buddy up with someone. I can talk to someone who I trust. Someone has my back. These are soft things, but so important in being successful. Another review article came out, self-motivation, general efficacy, autonomy, and some of the ones on the bottom have a little mixed evidence. But these are the softer things that we start looking for long-term success. And I want to summarize this part of it here. This is kind of looking at the literature beyond those two review articles. So I kind of did another literature search. And some other terms came up. And everything in red are things that are not likely to lead to success. Everything in green is something that's good. It's going to lead to maintaining your weight loss. So when it comes to cognitive things, people who are dichotomous thinkers, black, white, wrong, right, I'm on, I'm off. That's dichotomous thinking or binary thinking. That's not good. That doesn't lead to particularly long-term weight success. That's if I screwed up, oh, I'm a loser, what's the point? That's like dichotomous thinking. Versus conscientiousness. I'm really thinking carefully about my options and what I'm doing, and I'm vigilant. That's very important. When it comes to psychological, dissatisfaction with weight achieved and adverse childhood experiences are associated with not doing so well. Particularly childhood adverse experiences is really ballooning up and skyrocketing in our literature. Insults and trauma early on really seems to lead to long-term problems versus self-efficacy and self-regulation. In a personality, novelty seeking is not a particularly strong attribute when it comes to long-term weight maintenance. Novelty seeking is, gee, what's the newest thing that may work for me? And you try it for a while and you get bored and you go on to something else. Like, what's new? What's great? That's novelty seeking. That tends to not be so good for long-term weight control. Lower persistence. Like, I get frustrated early. The weight's not coming off fast enough. That's not a particularly good one. And lower self-directiveness. Tell me what to do. Just tell me what to do. I have patients come in all the time, and I try and do this dialogue and share decision-making, and a lot of them go, just tell me what to do. And that's not a particularly good trait to have. And lastly, behavioral. I talked about this, adherent self-monitoring. So those are the type of things I listen for when I see patients, and many of you may see yourself in some of these as well. I want to end up by talking about these two last bullet points. These are areas that, again, I'm particularly interested in and starting to do more and more work in. The first is lessons learned from taking a life event's weight history. So there's something in medicine which is called narrative medicine or autobiographical approach. And it's basically hearing from the patient, tell me your story, narrate for me. What gets in the way of you either taking weight off or keeping weight off? And I've learned to do that primarily by asking patients to graph their weight histories. This comes from Rethink Obesity. They've adopted a lot of this. This is a Novo Nordisk product in which they ask patients to chart their weight according to life events and then bring it into your healthcare provider. So it's on their website called Rethink Obesity. Let me show you some examples of what that looks like when I ask my patients to do it. So I just basically, in the waiting room or a few days before they get this. So this is someone who starts off with, and it's a blank sheet, so they filled it out. They gained weight college, marriage, pregnancy, menopause, personal illness, family illness, stressful job, and it ends up with personal illness, family, death, stressful, empty nest. It's hard for me to capture that in all those earlier slides I gave you, but this is really what goes on. Here's another example. Death in the family, a sedentary job, a full-time job, death in family, relocation, Weight Watchers, which was temporarily successful, illness in family. One would say, what does that have to do with controlling your weight? The answer is everything. It has to do with controlling your weight. Here's another one. Relatives commented just a bit about my weight. And it goes up and down and up. Then they have that Oprah Winfrey moment where she puts the wedding dress on and dances in a circle, and then she never wore the dress again. That's the wedding. And then ends up 3 deaths, began seeing an eating disorder therapist encourage natural eating. You see what happens with natural eating. Here's another one, depression. relapse family death, antipsychotic medication, exercise, and diet. This is like a fingerprint when I see patients. That's how individualized this is. Here's someone who is just going away to college, graduated high school, felt good about myself in 10th grade, broke up, new relationship, entered college. So this is someone with early childhood weight gain. And this last one really just sums it up entirely. Life. Just life. So it's these types of events that are just so meaningful, and to go to kind of a deeper learning with yourself or as a clinician in my case, it really takes getting down to this level, I think, to make a difference. Everything I showed you so far is important. Increased physical activity, self-monitoring, calorie control, vigilance, conscientiousness. But in large part, it's who are you? What's your worldview? What are the traits that you have that we really need to start paying attention to? And that really led me to the newest area that I'm trying to explore and have recently published on, which is the psychosocial behavioral segmentation, or we call six-factor questionnaire. So in marketing, the golden ring in marketing is to segment the population so you can sell a product. And you don't have to sell to every single person. But if you could segment the market, you're really going to resonate with each of those segments. And that's in part what we did here, is try to segment individuals who are struggling with their weight and understand at a higher level or deeper level as well, what is it about those individuals that may be leading to their weight. So we did something called cluster analysis, in which we take groupings or a set of items and through a computer program cluster them into domains and try to get a better understanding about those individuals. So what we did is we used a sample of 10,000 individuals. So we're pretty confident about that. Literally 10,000 individuals took a questionnaire online that we had posted, and we took that and using computer analysis, got it down to 27 questions or items, and we're able to identify 6 lifestyle phenotypes or factors that people fell into. And we gave them 6 different names that were meant to resonate immediately with someone. So one is called convenient diner. I'll show you in the next slide what's behind each one. Convenient diner, fast pacer, easily enticed eater, exercise struggler, self-critic, or all or nothing doer. So we were able to cluster all these, and this is what's behind all of these. So a convenient diner, what we're trying to get them to do is to have regular meal rhythm, calorie control, and planning. For the fast pacer, it's about time management, prioritization of self-care and effective stress. Easily enticed eater is food temptation and regulation, environmental cueing and hedonic reward of food. Exercise struggler is really getting them to be more physically active. Self-critic is dissatisfaction of body image and disparagement. And all or nothing doer is that dichotomous black-white thinker and lack of moderation. So what we're able to do, and I don't want to, I'm just showing you the relationships here. Obviously, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the numbers, but what I wanted to highlight is that what we found is the heavier the group of individuals are, going from class 1 obesity, class 2, and class 3 obesity, which are medical terms, what you see is the prevalence or the percent of individuals in each of these domains goes up. So it's exactly what we would expect. Individuals who are severely overweight have more likely have these patterns than someone who's not overweight at all. And the other thing I want to point out on the slide is there are gender differences. Very, very interesting. These are all percentages. So if we take the fast pacer, more females, almost double the amount of females, identify with a fast-paced life than males. And the other one is the self-critic. Almost double the amount of females have a sense of criticism of their shape and their weight and relationship in relating to others regarding their weight than men. And this is just the odds ratio. And what this shows is the more overweight you are, the more likely you have these particular patterns. So in conclusion, long-term weight maintenance is challenging, but there is considerable individual variability. Key cardinal behaviors have repeatedly been seen that are associated with success, such as self-monitoring, robust physical activity, frequent ongoing contact with a health professional, Several cognitive, psychological, personality, and behavioral factors have been identified and associated with being overweight and or weight loss outcomes. And lastly, two novel approaches, this autobiographical life events weight graph, as well as the 6-factor questionnaire, I hope can be helpful for individual profiling. Thank you. So it's my pleasure. Scott spoke this morning. Scott's the co-chair of the program, and Scott's going to flip over about some other approaches for weight management.
Thank you. All right, so let's just dive right in here. All right, so I'll try to hit on 3 general topics. 1, our biology strongly pushes to regain lost weight. That's a big part of the reason that it's so difficult, and explains some of the data that Bob showed you. There are several strategies that can help with long-term weight maintenance, and Bob has mostly talked about those. I'll add a few others, but I'll particularly focus on pharmacotherapy or medications that are FDA approved for long-term obesity management that can counter the biological changes that occur with weight loss and help with long-term weight maintenance. So here illustrates in the relatively short term one of the key things that happens with weight loss that makes it hard to keep going with it. So you have a meal, or let's even say before the meal, at baseline, before you lose weight, you're a given amount full. After the weight loss, you're less full, having eaten prior the same amount. So you get less satiated after weight loss, and it's even more pronounced after a given meal. So before the weight loss, for a given standardized meal, you report X amount of fullness, but then after that weight loss, with the same meal, you report much less fullness. And anyone who's gone on a diet here and lost some weight over a few months knows that. We feel less full, we feel more hungry, we feel more drive to eat, we often feel more cravings. Now this is over 3 months. We actually have data from another study showing that it persists for a year even after the diet and the weight loss ceases. So this is data from another trial, and look at what happens here. So first people go on a diet, they lose about 10% of their body weight over the course of about 10 months. That's very typical with medically monitored diets. And then they're followed up over the next year to see how they do. And as you can see, they regain a good amount of their weight. They mostly go back to their baseline behaviors. And the researchers studied before the diet, after the diet, right after the diet, and then a year later, a number of hormones that are relevant in terms of satiety and hunger. And so what they showed was that compared with before the diet, right afterwards at that 3-month mark, the satiety hormones went down, so people were less satiated, and the main hunger hormone, ghrelin, went way up, so people were more hungry. Now that's essentially what I showed you in the last slide. What was unique about this study is they followed them up a year later. The diet was over. They mostly regained their weight. They mostly went back to their baseline behaviors. And yet the hormones didn't change even a year later. So the satiety hormones were still diminished. The hunger hormone was still elevated, essentially pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing people to eat more, to be less full, and to regain their weight. So let me show you how it plays out in the moment in our lives. So here's a graph here of hunger or drive to eat. It's actually 2 separate measures, but they were identical in the trials. And then here is the time after you eat a meal. So at time 0, you eat the meal, 30 minutes after the meal, 60 minutes after the meal, and so forth. So first we'll look at before the diet, week 0. So what happens? Right before the meal, they're hungry. That makes sense. They want to eat. So they have their lunch, and they get less hungry, and they have less of a drive to eat. That's normal. We get full. And then over the next 2 hours, their hunger and their interest in eating goes back up, which then incites the next meal. So that's at baseline. Let's look at what happens right after people go on a diet and lose 10% of their body weight over 3 months. So first off, before they eat a meal, they're hungrier, quite a bit, about 40% hungrier than before the diet. And look what happens right after they eat the meal. 30 minutes later, they don't get as low in hunger as they had prior to the diet. And then over the next 2 hours, they remain more hungry and have more of a drive to eat throughout that next 2 hours. But again, what's most unique and fascinating and upsetting about this study is look at what happens a year later. Again, after they're no longer on the diet, they've mostly regained their weight and they're mostly back to their baseline behaviors, the body is still fighting against that weight loss. So they're still hungry before the meal, they're still less satiated after the meal, and they remain hungrier compared with baseline throughout the next 2 hours. So this is a big part of why it's so hard to lose weight, and this is how our biology plays into this. So the good news is we have a number of ways of addressing this. So here's the same graph that I showed you before. After the weight loss, people are less full, and if we give a medication that can counter that biology, they get fuller. Now, it turns out that this is a medication that's not on the market, which doesn't matter because there are a number that are, and I'm going to tell you about the ones that are available. But this is a proof of principle of how medications can be helpful. They can decrease appetite or increase satiety or decrease cravings or a combination thereof, such that when those things increase after a diet, we can counteract those biological signals and help people more easily maintain their weight over time. So here are the basic guidelines for pharmacotherapy. First, obesity medications are an adjunct to diet, exercise, and behavioral counseling. I wish we had a magic pill where you didn't have to focus on what you eat and you didn't have to focus on physical activity and we could just lose weight and be done with it. And unfortunately, we don't have that. We always want to start with counseling and behavioral change and working at it, as many, if not all of us do. And then if we're unable to achieve meaningful amounts of weight loss, and perhaps more importantly, meaningful degrees of health improvements, then we consider escalating therapy, perhaps to use medications. So in order to have an indication for pharmacotherapy, you need a BMI greater than 30, which is approximately 30 or 35 pounds above quote-unquote normal weight, or a BMI of 27 or greater, as long as you have one weight-related comorbid condition. So that would be like hypertension, high blood pressure, or high cholesterol, or diabetes, or prediabetes, or sleep apnea, or the like. And have already tried to lose weight and been unable to lose and or successfully maintain without the medication. And of course also you have to meet the label guidelines, some of which the label indications rather, some of which I'll tell you about in the coming slides. And currently all of the obesity medications available are only approved in adults greater than 18. And actually there is one medication, orlistat, that is approved in adolescents, although it's not used very often. And then all the obesity medications are contraindicated in pregnancy and breastfeeding. There's only actually one, to my knowledge, that has a known adverse effect on an unborn baby. But because the risk benefit of using a medication during pregnancy is just, it's never, pretty much never in the favor of using it when a woman is pregnant. So they are contraindicated in pregnancy as well as breastfeeding. And then I'm going to focus today only on the newer medications that are approved for long-term use. There are also some other medications that are approved for short-term use, and they can be very valuable medications, but given we're talking about long-term weight maintenance, I'm only going to focus on the ones that are approved formally by FDA for long-term use. So there are 5 such medications that are approved for long-term use. There's orlistat, which is known in the prescription version as Xenical. And then it's also, a few years ago, was approved over the counter as Ally. So if you go into Target or Walmart, you probably see a big thing for Ally there. Ally is the same thing, just half the dose as Xenical. That was approved, orlistat originally was approved back in 1997. Then we have phentermine topiramate ER, or Qsymia. Now, phentermine is available generically, and topiramate is available generically. But by themselves, they both lead to some weight loss. But together, they lead to quite a bit more weight loss, and they're approved in combination for long-term use. Then we have lorcaserin, or Belviq, which was approved in 2012. We have naltrexone bupropion SR, or Contrave. Again, naltrexone and bupropion are both approved generically. By themselves, they don't cause weight loss, but you put them together, and they cause quite good weight loss. And then we have liraglutide 3.0 milligrams, or Saxenda, and that was approved in 2010 specifically and only for diabetes. And then it was separately approved at a slightly different dose, specifically for obesity in 2015. So I'll tell you more about these. But first, let me show you what you can expect with medications. So first, we know that appropriate use of pharmacotherapy can improve long-term weight loss. So this is over 1 year. That's pretty long-term, although I'm going to show you longer in a minute. Here you have in white, these are people that got some behavioral counseling and took a placebo. But here you have people that are taking a medication. In this case, it's the naltrexone bupropion. And they're getting the same counseling, but the medication also, and they lose about double the weight and keep it off quite well over the course of a year when they're using the medication in addition to the counseling. Here we have 2-year data. So this is a different medication. This is phentermine topiramate ER. And so first you have a placebo group getting a little bit of counseling. Then you have the lower dose medication group, again with the same minimal amount of counseling. And then here you have the higher dose medication, also with a little bit of counseling. And so you can see, not only are you losing a lot more weight, but they're keeping it off quite well, and this is over 2 years. Here we have a medication that's been shown to have 3-year data with good sustenance of that weight loss over 3 years. So this is liraglutide 3.0. Here you have the placebo group. They're getting pretty good counseling here, so they're losing a nice little bit of weight. But in the group that gets the liraglutide plus that same counseling, they lose a lot more, and they keep it off quite well over 3 years. They also prevent diabetes quite substantially in patients with prediabetes over 3 years. And then we even have data on the older medication, orlistat, going out 4 years. Now, this was much more aggressive counseling, so people here did a version of the diabetes prevention program. And along with that counseling, they either went on a placebo and they lost a nice bit of weight, and they kept it off reasonably well enough. This is pretty good over 4 years, given that it's just a placebo and counseling. But in the group that also got the orlistat, they lost quite a bit more weight, just about double, and they kept it off quite a bit better. So by the end of 4 years, they're keeping off at least double the weight. So that is, in theory, what we can get with the use of medication to counter our biology, our biological changes that occur after weight loss, and to help us to keep losing weight or to better keep that weight off. I added in one study that I was involved with that looked at phentermine topiramate ER in patients with extreme obesity. So extreme obesity is the clinical term. So this is patients with a BMI greater than 45. Now, this traditionally is a population that's considered would only benefit from bariatric surgery, and certainly that population may get very good benefits from bariatric surgery. But this is the first study, to my knowledge, that evaluated even this population, this subpopulation, with pharmacotherapy, and we showed some pretty impressive outcomes. So let's just look at the green. This is the slightly higher dose of the medication. Almost everyone, just about 90%, lost at least 5% over a year. More than two-thirds lost at least 10%. Look at this. So this is at least 15% weight loss, and we had 50% of people losing that. So 15% is about what you get with lap band over the course of a year. And then here you have at least 20%, and we had over a quarter of people that kept off at least 20% of their body weight over the course of a year. So there we're getting into bariatric surgery ranges of weight loss. So although this has only been shown to my knowledge with this medication, this is a proof of principle that should be to some degree applicable across the range of other medications that we have. So it's good that we have this great treatment of bariatric surgery in patients that have higher BMIs, but pharmacotherapy may be appropriate as well. And then I'll offer one other study before I tell you the specifics of each of the long-term medications we have. This is a unique study that was done with liraglutide 3 milligrams. And it was specifically looking at weight maintenance. So as opposed to randomizing people at the beginning, before they start losing weight, to either a medication or a placebo, here they did something very different. So if you look here, this was where they started losing weight. People went on a typical medically monitored diet. They had a goal of losing at least 5% of their body weight within the first 10 or 12 weeks. And on average, they lost about 6% of their body weight in that first 10 or 12 weeks. And only then were they randomized to either placebo or the medication. Everyone got counseling, the same counseling in both groups. And they wanted to see how well the medication helps people keep it off, how well it helps them maintain their weight. So in the placebo group, you can see they actually did pretty good. On the one hand, placebos are real, so they're getting a little benefit there. On the other hand, there was really good counseling in both of the groups, and so they did well. They kept off on average all the weight that they lost, but in the liraglutide group, they kept losing more weight. By the end of the full year, between the initial weight loss and the extra weight loss, about 13% body weight loss through the first year, and many, many more people kept off the initial weight loss through the first year compared with placebo. So we have lots of reasons to believe that pharmacotherapy can be helpful for long-term weight maintenance. I certainly have lots of experience clinically, as does Bob, and frequently can be very helpful for patients. So now let me tell you just a few key bullet points about each of the medications that are approved for long-term use. So first we have orlistat. It decreases fat absorption in the gut. It's also available as Ally. You take it 3 times a day with meals and try to aim for a low-fat diet. You want to take a multivitamin separate from the medication because in addition to blocking some of the fat that gets absorbed, it can also block some of the fat-soluble vitamins from being absorbed. The most common side effects are gastrointestinal, gas, upset stomach, etc., diarrhea. And then there are some contraindications. As I mentioned, all obesity medications are contraindicated in pregnancy, as well as in this case, chronic malabsorption syndromes and cholestasis. Then we have lorcaserin. This blocks a satiety receptor in the brain, so people feel more satiated. It's a Schedule IV medication, so in certain states there are some limitations in how it can be prescribed. This is only 1 pill once a day. It's contraindicated in pregnancy. The most common side effects are generally fatigue and headache. If you're taking a serotonin medication like Prozac or some other types of antidepressants, sometimes they can interact a little bit. You have to be careful if you have valve disease, heart valve disease, some psychiatric disorders, and priapism. And then there is a valuable set of rules of thumb for all the newer medications on how much weight we want to see you lose in the first few months, which gives us a sense of whether you'll keep losing weight or not. I'll show you a slide on that in just a moment, but for this medication, the recommendation is that you lose at least 5% of your body weight in the first 12 weeks of use. And if you lose that 5%, then most likely you're a responder, you're going to keep responding, and the average weight loss at a year is about 12% in that population. On the other hand, if you don't lose at least 5% in the first 12 weeks, most likely you're not going to lose more weight going forward, and therefore you can stop the medication and try something else. So it's nice. We have pretty early in the course, we know whether it's worth continuing the medication. You don't have to take it forever not knowing whether it's working or not. Then we have phentermine topiramate ER. Phentermine is an old medication approved in 1959. It's a good medication by itself, and it blunts appetite. Topiramate is also an old medication that's been used for many decades for migraine prevention and seizure prevention. It's also a good medication by itself. It's not formally approved for weight loss, although it usually leads to a little bit of weight loss by itself. But when you put them together, they lead to quite a bit more weight loss, and the combination has been approved for long-term use. It's also a Schedule IV medication. There are 4 different doses available, so usually we start at the lowest dose and slowly go up to the right dose. The most common side effects are typically insomnia and a little bit of tingling in the fingers, sometimes the toes as well. It's not anything damaging. Sometimes it's annoying. Most of the time it doesn't happen, and when it happens, it usually goes away pretty quickly. It's contraindicated in pregnancy, glaucoma, Mayo inhibitor use. Mayo inhibitors are very old, very uncommonly used antidepressants, and as well as hyperthyroidism. And then the rule of thumb here is 3% after 12 weeks. If you lose 3% in the first 12 weeks, most likely you're going to keep losing weight. And if you don't lose 3% in the first 12 weeks, most likely you're not going to keep losing weight, so you can look at other options instead. Then we have naltrexone bupropion extended release. So bupropion is an old school antidepressant that's also been approved for smoking cessation. By itself, it leads to very little weight loss, and whatever you lose usually comes back. Naltrexone is an old addiction medication, and by itself it doesn't lead to any weight loss. But you put the two together and they lead to very good weight loss together. This is not a scheduled medication, so it's, not any more difficult for your doctor to write this medication than writing a blood pressure medication, for example. Ideally, you build up to 2 pills twice a day with this medication. The most common side effect by far is nausea, although in most cases the nausea is mild and it goes away. Contraindications include pregnancy, the Mayo inhibitor antidepressant medications, uncontrolled hypertension. So it's okay if you have high blood pressure, you can still use the medication, but not if it's uncontrolled. So you want to get it under control first, because sometimes the medication can raise blood pressure a little bit. Seizure disorders and chronic opioid use. And then the number here is less than 5%, is 5% at 16 weeks. If you lose 5% within the first 4 months, you're likely going to lose more going forward, so it's recommended to continue. If you don't lose 5% in the first 16 weeks, most likely you won't lose any more weight, and so it's recommended to stop it. And then the most recently approved medication is liraglutide 3 milligrams. As I mentioned before, it's not a new medication per se. The molecule has been around for some time, and at a very slightly lower dose, 1.8 milligrams, was approved for diabetes in 2010. The liraglutide 3.0 is only approved for obesity, and 1.8 is only approved for diabetes. It's also not a scheduled medication, so very easy for doctors to prescribe it. Patients generally say that it increases satiety. That's the main description for how patients say it works. This is not, unlike the other ones, this is not an oral medication. It's a subcutaneous injection. Now let me just say something about that, because when it was coming out, I was concerned that patients would have a problem with that, and that just hasn't been the case. So this subcutaneous injection is so small that you can barely see it. I don't like injections. I'm not phobic about them. I just don't like them. So when I go with my 6-year-old to get a flu shot, he's just like, okay, give me it, and I'm like this. And I've done this injection to myself to see what it was like, and I was kind of like that too, and I did it. I honestly didn't even feel it. It's a good technology they have. It comes in like a pen, and the injection is very, very small. The most common side effect by far is nausea, although again, it's not common that it's a problematic nausea. The vast majority of cases are mild. They go away on their own, and it's just not a big deal. Patients should not be using the medication if they've had a history of a certain type of thyroid cancer called medullary thyroid carcinoma, and also if they've had a history of acute pancreatitis. And then the numbers here are 4% at 16 weeks. So again, not to be a broken record, if you lose at least 4% in the first 16 weeks, most likely you're a responder, you're going to keep responding, and the average weight loss at a year is about 13%. If you don't lose at least 4% in the first 16 weeks, most likely you're not going to lose more going forward, and so unless there's a reason otherwise, you can stop the medication and try something else. And this is just what I've been saying. So here's an example from one of the medications. They started here, and very quickly, people fell into one of two groups. Either they responded and responded quickly and lost a lot of weight in the first 12 weeks, more than that 5%, they lost 8%, or they didn't. They lost almost nothing, no more than we would expect with a placebo. And the ones that didn't lose anything, they didn't lose any more going forward, even staying on the medication. And the ones that lost it kept losing weight over the rest of the year. So you'll respond quickly, most likely, or you won't respond at all, most likely. It's not 100%, but it's a really good rule of thumb. The other thing that's important for long-term maintenance is long-term benefits require long-term use. So there was a trial with lorcaserin looking specifically at that. So here, people were randomized to either placebo or the medication, and everybody got good counseling. So the placebo group lost a nice little bit of weight. The medication group lost a nice bit more weight over the first year. And then at the end of the first year, the people who were taking the medication were re-randomized to either stay on it or switch to a placebo. And it was all blinded and randomized. They didn't know what they were getting, but look what happened. The people who switched to placebo, they quickly started regaining their weight, and they basically ended up where they would have been had they not taken the medication at all. Whereas the people who kept on the medication, they kept keeping off their weight. So again, another important principle, we have to keep using what's helpful for us if we expect to keep the weight off. It's not 100%. Plenty of people may use a medication short term, get a great benefit, and they can try coming off of it. And there are quite a number of patients I know that have been able to do it and keep off the weight very well. But far more than that have had to stay on it, or when they come off of it, they tend to regain their weight. So it's always an individualized situation, but it's important that we keep that in mind. And then whenever possible, we want to combine effective modalities because they work better together. So here you take a placebo and you don't get any weight loss. You take a medication alone, you get a nice bit of weight loss. You do aggressive lifestyle counseling and you get a nice bit of weight loss. But you put the two together, the lifestyle counseling and the medication, and you get much more weight loss than either alone. So whenever possible, we want to be aiming for that combination. And then finally, this just goes back to the last slide, and Bob actually mentioned this as well. One of the most consistent predictors of long-term progress is ongoing long-term support. So this can be going to a doctor or a dietitian regularly and continuing maintenance visits over time. It can include going to a weekly group setting. That's why Weight Watchers has weekly groups, and other commercial programs have weekly groups, but very important to do, and you'll see much better long-term maintenance, and you'll feel better about it most likely with the ongoing support. So I'll stop there, and thank you all for your time.
So Scott and I both would love to entertain questions. I think we go till 3 o'clock, so we really built in quite a bit of time for any questions and questions you have or comments that you have for both of us. So please don't be shy and use the microphone. There should be microphones actually at both sides. Yeah.
I've got a question. How do you bring up the topic of weight loss medication? I am a gastric sleeve patient in 2014, and I've experienced some regain in the last year. I guess you could say he's a jerk, but my primary care physician that I go to on a regular basis, when I go to him for anything, he always talks to me about my weight. Mm-hmm. And even after the sleeve, he just, he's kind of cocky when I bring up weight loss. How do I approach the topic of requesting
Super.
that he even consider?
Scott has the answer for you.
Yeah, so the first thing you need is a new doctor.
Yeah, I know. I know.
And it's inappropriate for him to treat you that way.
It just, and my husband is like, well, it is what it is. And I'm like, but we pay him.
Right.
We pay him. I don't feel like I have to put up with that. I mean, I don't know.
So,
But I agree.
So, there's lots of good data out there now, and it with the internet, it's freely available. So one of the things that I would do is almost put together a very short summary book report or something like that for him or for the new doctor. If you want my slides, I'll get you my slides. I'll give you my email as well, and I can help you get more stuff. You put together the list of the FDA-approved medications, and you put together, write a couple things there about what you can expect in terms of weight loss, in terms of side effects, and just be open and honest and say, look, I work very hard at this. I'm not trying to, take a shortcut or anything like that. And because I work so hard at this, I don't want to leave anything on the table. I want to make sure that I'm being treated as effectively as possible. Another thing that I would do is use an analogy with him. So if you were the exact same weight and size and whatever, and you had high blood pressure, and you've tried over and over and over again to do a low-salt diet and physical activity and all of that, and the blood pressure didn't come down, he'd have no problem whatsoever starting you on a blood pressure medication. He'd probably be berating you about not taking it, right? So consider using that analogy. You can use diabetes analogy, blood pressure, cholesterol as well, and see where that goes. But I would, I don't mean it in sort of a punitive way toward him, but you deserve the best care that you can get.
He's very old school. He's very old school.
Perfect.
So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Melinda?
So, sort of along the same topic area, what is your recommendation for someone who's had surgery and is starting to gain weight? At what point is it too much weight that you suddenly say, oh, maybe medications are appropriate? So what is that break point for people?
Yeah, so the whole area of combined therapy is a relatively new one. For some reason, in the obesity space, we've always had this single-minded therapy. It's either lifestyle treatment, pharmacotherapy, bariatric surgery. If you go to bariatric surgery, you've already put yourself in that slot, and then whatever you do, you do. And really, it's over the past several years that we've started, and the availability of medications over the past 4 years or so, that we now have other options to do dual therapy. If you think about all kinds of other medical problems, cancer would be one example. You have chemotherapy, you have radiation, you have lifestyle management, you have all these areas. And obesity treatment, we're starting to do that. So it's a newer area. And I think a lot of us now, Scott and I and others, are looking at the data and being much more aggressive and proactive. And there's two categories I think of when I'm helping to care for patients who underwent bariatric surgery. One is that their weight trajectory is not where it ought to be at 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. We're starting to get that data of what that trajectory should look like. So we are proactively starting to use medication when one has not responded like we would anticipate. The other is someone who has reached the goal but is now starting to regain weight, and will be very proactive in that individual. So there's 2 time points that we are starting to look at. What's missing, quite frankly, though, is the evidence and the data about how effective can we be and when should we intervene. But that's kind of the evolving thought on helping patients who've chosen to undergo bariatric surgery. Thank you.
I really have 2 questions. The first is, can the combination medications be prescribed separately, since a lot of insurances don't cover weight loss medications, and it'd be cheaper and be more likely to get covered that way separately versus as the name brand pill?
Yeah, they certainly can. In some cases, I think that works pretty well. In other cases, it doesn't work as well. So with naltrexone bupropion, for example, naltrexone generically is very difficult to tolerate. It gives a lot of nausea, and you get much less with the combination. So that one I usually try to use the brand whenever possible. With the phentermine topiramate, I actually find that the generics work quite well. And so I'm often using the generics on that one. So it, case by case basis, but certainly that's something that's possible.
All right, the next question is, are there any like holistic or herbal medications that have any efficacy at all in weight loss?
There is no herbal medication or dietary supplement that has been proven to cause weight loss, except for one is various fiber preparations. And you don't need the expensive ones, but any bit of fiber that you get, whether from supplement or food, makes you feel a little full and leads to a very little bit of extra weight loss, but real weight loss. And then the only other thing, it's not a supplement, it's over the counter, is Ally. So it's over the counter, but it is a medication, and that leads to it. None of the others, all the things you see on Dr. Oz, have either don't work or just haven't been studied well enough to prove that they work.
Hi. Oh,
Let
sorry.
me just, let's go
Go
over
ahead.
here.
Thank you both for very enlightening lectures. Both of you touched on two things. One is the importance of self-weighing, and second, the importance of coming back and follow-up and seeing your medical weight loss team over a long period of time. Have you had any experience on the digital side of things, keeping track of weight digitally, and whether from a practitioner standpoint and a patient standpoint that helps? And second, in terms of visiting virtually through the smartphone or through the computer versus having to come back in person. Have you had any personal experiences with that, and how's it gone?
Yeah, I have. So there are now, when I talk to patients, particularly those that are quantitative or analytical and love numbers and love technology, I often start by telling them that we have the opportunity to have a personalized medicine with weight management, that you can track your diet, right, with an app. You could track your physical activity with some form of accelerometer, and you could track your weight. You have the three major variables as an electronic dashboard to take control of your life. So we have Wi-Fi scales, as you probably know, there's many of them now that upload it. Some companies retrofit it. By disclosure, the company I'm involved in has an electronic dashboard, and they do counseling when the client uploads the weight and uploads their diet to an electronic dashboard, and the counselor is doing Skype counseling. So that technology exists. As a clinician at Northwestern, patients will often come in and show me. It's not integrated into electronic health record yet. There's a lot of HIPAA things that are going on there. But patients will often come in and show me their data on their smartphone, or will pull up their data on the computer since it's in the cloud and look at the data. So my dietitians do it a little bit more than I do because of my lack of time. But for patients who embrace that technology, it's been incredibly helpful. Because now you do problem solving and pattern recognition and what's going on there, looking at trajectories. So I embrace that, but someone has to be technologically minded and have the skill base to do it. But when patients have that, we really utilize it. Is that a good enough answer for you?
I'll go with it for now.
All right.
Hi. With the long-term use of the pharmaceuticals, are there any concerns with like any organ damage, such as liver damage?
So all the medications that have been approved for long-term use have been studied long-term. So all of them have at least 1-year studies in the clinical trials, but typically quite a bit longer. Plus, for those that have been around now, we have post-marketing data going out many, many years. There's not, with anything you can always see things here and there, but there's nothing to write home about. I think there's an important consideration there that often isn't factored in. You can't compare a medication or any treatment to nothing in a vacuum, right? What you're comparing it to is doing nothing or versus doing something. And given that we know that there are lots of health problems and organ damage and so forth that happens with untreated obesity, most likely you're going to see improvements if you're on an appropriate medication and you lose a meaningful amount of weight. You will likely see weight-related benefits that accrue from that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Wanted to ask your opinion about the impact of sleep and weight gain. One of the things that I experienced when I started gaining weight is I was having a lot of problems with my back and my hip. And I had an accident. I actually fell, and I wasn't sleeping. Every time I would move, I would wake up, and it seemed like although my routine was the same, my diet was the same, my weight kept going up. And I wanted to hear your opinion about the impact of lack of sleep, and is sleep medication part of the medical therapy that we use for weight management?
So I'll answer first, Scott. So that's a great segue to introduce you to tomorrow's programming. I'll answer you directly. But one of the plenary sessions tomorrow is on sleep, the importance of sleep and health. And and the same guy, Jason Ong, is doing a breakout session in the afternoon also on sleep. So it is that important that we've now brought that into the programming. The short answer, though, but without going over what he's going to go over, is that there's a growing data now that shows, from an epidemiologic or population point of view, is that those with the lowest number of sleep hours weigh the most. So it's indirect relationship. Second of all, there's a lot of studies that show if you take individuals and put them into a sleep lab and sleep deprive them, in a very short period of time, within days, they develop insulin resistance, cravings for sugar, changes in metabolism, just by short period of sleep deprivation. So for those types of data and others, those of us who are doing weight management are now routinely incorporating questions about sleep into our assessment and providing sleep guidance. Now, part of it is sleep deprivation. We're busy, we're not getting enough sleep, or we're in pain, so we don't sleep well. The other reason we ask is because of sleep apnea and actual sleep disorders that need to be treated. So that is certainly part of my intake, and we're talking sleep hygiene. I refer to a psychologist for sleep hygiene if needed, and that is, again, part of that holistic approach to health and weight management.
Well, I'll just add, on top of that, relatively small amounts of sleep deprivation also significantly affect hunger and satiety hormones. We've shown that several times. So the big problem is we literally have never had a single trial that shows that improving sleep leads to weight loss. And I think part of the problem there is, as hard as it is to lose weight, it's pretty hard to change sleep patterns. And that's a whole other clinical science that needs a lot more study and work.
I work a lot with my clients on fitness programs, and I've noticed, like, when they start pharmacotherapy for high cholesterol, they get exercise fatigue really fast. And I know there's some correlation with the medications for cholesterol and lack of energy. But do you see the same thing with some of the weight maintenance medications when it comes to, like, exercise endurance, things like that?
Are you saying, do I expect lack of energy with weight medications?
Yes. Do you see a similar, like you do in some of the hypocholesterolemia drugs?
Typically the opposite. People, when they're losing weight, they end up having lots more energy. With that said, I had mentioned that lorcaserin does have a not uncommon side effect of fatigue in some people. I mean, it's maybe 8-10%, something like that. And theoretically, you could see it with other medications, but it's not something we see very often at all.
Thank you.
Hi, I just wanted to make a comment actually about cost. Somebody already brought up the cost of these medications. So I'm a bariatric patient. I had the gastric sleeve surgery and lost 70 pounds, hit a giant plateau. It didn't matter what I was doing, it would not impact. But I needed a 100-pound weight loss to reach my BMI goal. I've been on one of these medications for a little over 2 years, and in 6 months I was able to lose that additional 30 pounds, and now I've maintained a 100-pound weight loss for almost 2 years. So they work really well, and somebody did make the comment that it's really hard to get them covered by insurances. I'm really lucky, and I work for a company who's opted into treating obesity. I know that's weird language to think about, but insurance companies can't opt out of treating diabetes or high cholesterol, high blood pressure, but they have to opt in to treating obesity. It is not automatic. Most patients don't know this. So I just, like I said, my company's opted in. I had surgery. I've had intensive lifestyle and counseling. I have access to medications, but many of us in this room do not, including some of my very dear friends. So I just wanted to mention that you should go to your HR department and you should fight for obesity to be treated like any other disease on your insurance plan. Ask them to start covering these medications because it has to be made at the HR level. So I hope that helps.
Thank you.
One more?
Yeah, I think we have room, we have time for really one more question. Sorry, I think you got shout out last time. We will answer it though when you come up. Go ahead, sir.
Wait, just a quick question. So say you had the surgery and you're starting to gain weight again. Now, do you have to get back up to the 30 BMI before you can start taking the pills, or can you start it before then?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So, to my knowledge, that's not been codified clearly anywhere, but the accepted practice is no, you don't. Once you have obesity, even if your numbers go down. Just like once you have hypertension, even if you get your blood pressure down, you still have that diagnosis, and if it's climbing up, your doctor can be more aggressive about adjusting things. And so we think about it the same way in terms of obesity.
Great. I want to thank you all for coming. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
And I think we now have a 15-minute break, if I'm not mistaken. Then we have another breakout, so you guys will choose between another breakout after that. Thank you for coming.